He's one of those many Netherlandish painters whose birth date we don't know, and therefore we feel rather uneasy about attempting any kind of dating of the early work. We assume that he was born in 1425 or 1430, somewhere in that bracket, because a document establishing him as an artist does so at the sort of time when most are joining the Guild of St. Luke. And there's a wedding contract and a dispute with a relative by marriage and so on. These odd little things survive. And we know that he died in 1516. And that's about it. And into that, we have to fit an extraordinary body of work. Nobody has ever known how to do it, and everybody sets out to do it with absolute authority. You compare one authority with another, and nothing fits. If you write down the chronology proposed by Torinai and Baldas and any other expert, and compare them, they make absolutely no sense. They're not really within reach of each other. It seems to me that you must do a number of slightly experimental things. You take the early work, or what we presume to be the early work, and compare it with what was happening in the Netherlands, what we know what was happening in the Netherlands in the work of other painters. And you will find that there are parallels. There are ways of constructing figures, there are ways of dealing with perspective, there are ways of distorting pictorial space, which are common to a whole host of not very good painters.
Looking at this scene, we can begin to appreciate the kind of hellscape forever associated with Bosch. But we should also recognize that this is just one component of the complete work of art. It forms the right-hand panel of a series of 3 paintings. On the left is a scene of paradise, while the large central panel gives the whole piece its name, the Last Judgment. Time and again, Bosch executed his work in this 3-fold format, popular at the time. The triptych.
The triptych is kind of well-organized form of altarpiece all over Europe. You'll find it in Poland, you'll find it in Portugal, you'll find it in Italy, and you'll find it in the Netherlands. It has the great advantage of giving you a center picture which performs the business of the altarpiece, 2 wings which will often allow you to paint a portrait of the donor, or put in the donor's patron saints, or put in the patron saints of the church. And then during Lent, the lead in to Easter, you close the thing, and on the back of the panels you'll get, usually in grisaille, in paint which is grey in tonality, goes from black to white or dark grey to white. Figures which again have some relevance either to the donors or to the church, but are without colour. In other words, it's sombre, it reflects the mood of Lent, and it shuts away the great glory of the centre. And the great glory of the centre isn't necessarily painted, it can be carved. Tilman Riemenschneider in Germany with a wonderful, great coloured altarpiece. And you simply shut it away with the wings. Then Easter comes, you drape it with black cloth, you will spend 24 hours celebrating Tenebrae on your knees with all the windows darkened, and then you will celebrate the ascension of Christ, the resurrection of Christ, by opening the doors. Everything is back to normal. And there is a great theatrical thrill about this. Think of it in terms of opening up the light with windows, of inserts, bells and singing, and you get the theatre of the church. And that's why the triptych is the perfect form. Throughout the medieval period, it was impossible for the peasantry and the working classes, slightly different, and the middle classes, to exist without having a constant awareness of the imminence of death. There were no doctors to speak of. There were only rudimentary remedies for any kind of illness, and something quite simple like measles or scarlet fever would carry you off. There was hunger, the scurvy or teeth fell out. The average age of people was, at the time of death, was much earlier than it is now. It was common for people to get married at the age of 14, have children at once, and be dead by the time they were 24. A short life, not a very merry one. They died of cold, they died of hunger, they died of scurvy, all kinds of deprivation. And so, if you look at medieval life and you look at the history of famine in medieval times right across Europe, you realize that death was always there. You have kind of allegorical things like the dances of death, the early form of illustration, continuing well into Renaissance times. The warning constantly that death awaits you whatever you do. You're the young, you're the old, you're male, female, you're sleeping, you're eating. Whatever you're doing, death is always at your shoulder. With death, there is judgment, there is hell, there's purgatory, and there is heaven with a stroke of luck. And so it was a world of angels and devils all the time.
Images such as these remind us that the medieval mindset conceived of a tangible physical hell, of eternal physical suffering. Many modern Christians place less emphasis on the reality of hell, choosing instead to define it philosophically as the absence of God. But if we were to imagine a real hell, we would surely conjure up a scene similar to this. It is not just the smoke and the fire and the physical suffering that makes this a fearful place. It is the sight of unfathomable creatures whose existence is as real as that of the unfortunate humans depicted here. Grotesque creatures are one of the most striking features of Bosch's work, as we can see in the terrifying central panel of the Last Judgment triptych. Bosch surely appreciated that it is the unknown that we fear most, and no one on earth can ever have witnessed creatures like these terrible hybrids of man and beast. More unsettling still is the fusion of the animate and the inanimate, as we can see with this surreal knife creature advancing purposefully in the bottom right of the panel. It is this sense of purpose that, for many, is the greatest artistic achievement of this horrifying scene. This is a world where purpose and agency are undoubtedly present. The monsters that we see here have objectives which do not appear out of place, given the context that Bosch has created. This is a world with its own internal order of things, an order we cannot fathom, other than with reference to the obvious human suffering. It is this totality of vision that makes the Last Judgment a disturbing image, even for those who consider the idea of hell absurd. It is unsurprising that many modern critics believe that Bosch must have been inspired by some kind of hallucinogenic stimulant.
There seems to me to be a concerted attempt by a large number of scholars of Bosch to make him something that he was not. And one of these is a major painter of landscape. I find it very difficult to believe that a new school of landscape painting developed out of Bosch's paintings. And too few people saw them, too few people realized that there was a landscape element that was worth looking at. Too many of his pictures have entirely schematic landscapes, which have no relevance to the history of landscape painting. They have some relevance in the history of invention, but not of observation. He's entirely different from Bruegel, who is a really significant pusher on at the whole business of landscape painting. I have no doubt that he went and sat in the open air and drew trees. He may even have painted trees. There are wonderful trees in late painting like St. Anthony, which didn't come out of his head, which did come out of observation. But in general, I don't think he's at all significant. And pushing Paternia onto him as impossible without him seems to me to be nonsense.
Surviving works by Bosch tell the familiar story of the final hours of Jesus Christ right up to the moment of his death. The finest of these can be considered the artist's final masterpiece, Christ carrying the cross. Here the folly of the mob can again be seen. But there is a far greater sense of gloating in the faces of these individuals than in the earlier Ecce Homo. They have got their wish now. Jesus is soon to die a terrible death. They are savouring the moment. The two criminals also condemned to die are not spared their malice. One of them appears to have some spirit of resistance left, but the other is now completely broken and resigned to his fate. But it is Christ himself that represents Bosch's greatest achievement here. Eyes closed, he is somehow apart from the chaos around him. For Christians, this is entirely appropriate. The person of Jesus has human and divine elements, and Bosch somehow captures both in his representations of the Christ figure. Christians also believe that Jesus triumphed over the folly of men with the achievement of his resurrection. But this is an image whose overall sense of pessimism cannot be denied. It is unfortunate that we have no record of the thoughts and beliefs of the artist who created it.
With Bosch, I think we have absolutely no idea how his mind works. We have no idea what kind of a man he was at all. He may have been almost anything. He may have been, and I suspect, I mean, if you force me into a corner and say, what do you think he was like? My inclination is to say that in order to paint what he did and not cause outrage, he must have been extremely devout in his observances. He must have been a religious and not a bitter and twisted old man whom everybody disliked. He must have been deeply respected, which suggests to me that he was serious in all his endeavors, and that his personality, whatever it was, is not allowed to come through.